Right, this week on Shamanic Freedom Radio, I've got Kira Young, who does the Bridge podcast, which is available on Blog Talk Radio, and she also runs a blog called Psychopaths in Charge. Welcome to the show, Kira.
Thank you. I have recently moved over to People's Internet Radio from Type 1. And before that, I was with Tyrannosaur, so all good people.
Yeah, it's good that there's still a few of them left in this world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so yeah, I started listening to you because it all started with me when I was listening to, I found Thomas Sheridan. He was talking about psychopaths, and he was a great help with you because you'd taken the same interest as him. And yeah, I'd like to hear, because I'm not as familiar with your perspective on this as his, so if you could maybe start with that, when psychopathy come into your radar, so to speak.
Okay, well, for me, I was targeted at work by a female psychopath, and so I didn't know what was going on at first. I just thought she was crazy, or had some sort of weird personality issues. And then I realized everything that she was doing was very purposeful. So it was typical divide and conquer. She would bring me into her office and tell me people had complained, some anonymous complaint. There were all these anonymous complaints against me. And finally I realized they were so, off the deep end that they just couldn't possibly be true, because they got increasingly more bizarre. And the way that I dealt with it, at first I got really emotional and everything, and I noticed that she really got something out of that. So then I tried having no emotional response to anything that she did, and that's when things got increasingly more bizarre, and I could tell that I wasn't imagining that she was a psychopath. But Thomas's stuff was really the first where there was anything, I could find anything about female psychopaths, but he really didn't say much either about it. So once I started, reading his work, that inspired the blog, and it's just been an amazing journey. I mean, I called in once to his radio show, and well, maybe more than once, but and then that turned into my own radio show, and I'm still working. So my book is coming out slow, but it's coming along. And I was able to get off all pharmaceuticals, and I have, I guess my real take is that with the psychopaths in charge, that's why all of these things are wrong in our environment, why we're being poisoned by agrochemicals, and we're being poisoned by GMOs. We're being, our water and air is being poisoned by gas spills, chemical spills, all of these things. Why that's happening is actually purposeful, and it keeps us weak, and it keeps us from realizing that it is a systematic attack against us, because they want it all.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've not heard anyone actually bring this up, so I thought, while it's on my mind at the moment, is that these psychopaths that are in charge, they have to breathe the same air as us. They have to breathe the same chemtrails that we do. And the other day, when during the time of the NATO lockdown in Cardiff, as you probably know, David Cameron went surfing in the sea down here in the southwest, and they get into the same Fukushima radioactive sea that we do. So I just think, are they killing themselves, or do they have some sort of secret antidote that they don't talk to us about?
I think it's probably more a function of how they're organized, because even within the psychopathic elite, there's an elite of the elite, and so there's the front people, which we see, like the David Camerons, right? But they're just the front people. They're not actually the ones that are really controlling that agenda, but they go along with it because they're the front people, and that's their job, to do that. So I don't know how they, reconcile that in their own minds, except for that, it's not as bad as it's going to be as it continues.
some form of denial of their own. I know that
Yeah.
the what you call it, the private school system, or what they call public schools over here, which is the opposite of what they're called in America. I
Right.
mean, they're pretty notorious. You've probably heard a lot of stories about them. You know,
Yeah.
they're pretty sadistic and very authoritarian, and leave them coming out the other end feeling empathy dead, and then they're told that they're the elite. You know.
Right. Like Skull and Bones, here in America, it's the same thing. And if you notice, a lot of these elite occult things in America, like Skull and Bones, they have to use the bones of Indians to try to get their power. They have to, so that's a whole thing. Like America's really built on a bunch of Indian burial grounds, right? So, but that's a double-edged sword for the elite, because the people who are in touch, no matter who they are, because race is really just an illusion too, that doesn't really exist. But all we have is culture. So the people that are connected, that live on the land, the ancestors speak through them.
Yeah.
That's where you know.
Yeah.
So if I'm living on top of, we're all living on top of something.
Yeah, that's true. And nature itself does not make any distinctions there whatsoever. It's only the human mind that does that, or
Right.
and in particular the inhuman mind of the psychopaths as well, who are dividing us
Right.
all. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I kind of learnt recently, and the Scotland fiasco, which has just happened.
Yeah.
I was looking at that, and there's been loads of blatant evidence of vote rigging coming out. And I mentioned in my last podcast that we went and invaded Serbia and gave them regime change, forced it upon them when they were caught vote rigging. And it's okay for us to do it, of course. And
Right.
I
Same
think,
with America.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
particularly
Bush
with
too.
America. Oh, yeah. I mean, he stole 2 elections, did he not?
Hanging Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same anywhere. They'll do it any way they want. All they have to do is spin whatever message they want to spin in the media. That's why you don't believe anything you see in the mainstream media at all. None of it. Because it's all spin.
Yeah.
All of it.
Well, I learnt how to discern, because when I was, back in the days when I was reading David Icke's books, I decided the only way to actually read or find anything believable or plausible in the media is to look for the insignificant details in the mainstream, which is significant in the alternative, and see if they correlate. So I remember I was reading David Icke saying that about the bloodline families, and then I was reading the newspaper, and they mentioned that David and Samantha Cameron were both, bastard childs of blue bloods that went back a few hundred years. So that's the sort of thing that I tend to believe when I correlate that, because that's not part of the spin. That's just kind of incidental to the spin.
Right. Yeah. You look for patterns, and you see the same game played over and over. Just parts 1, 2, and 3. It's more. Yeah. So I actually still do monitor the mainstream media, because I guess I have a methodology of that similar to yours, of looking at the patterns. Yeah, I mean, like I knew months ago, and it's in my blog. I knew months ago that they just wanted to get into Syria, and they would do whatever it took to get into Syria. So that's why when the beheadings started happening, I knew it was just them trying to get into Syria, because they've made it really obvious that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
That's where they want to make their blood money next.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder about. Just before I came on here, I read a pretty depressing blog by Chris Spivey, who was just on the guest. You're familiar with Chris, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's gone a little bit Armageddon recently. He mentioned that a block had been cut out of the Georgia Guidestones and had been replaced with a new block with 2014 on it, and he honestly really reckons that this is the end now. I mean, over the years, I have become a bit of an Armageddon skeptic, because many times that they tell us the world is going to end, it never actually has done. But I don't,
Well, it never does. It just goes to a new beginning. That's what 2012 was too. It was just a new beginning, just the end of one cycle, beginning of the other. So that's how natives see it, and that's what all native prophecy said is just from one, it's the end of one cycle, beginning of the next, and we've been in that our whole life. It doesn't happen in an instant. It's a process, just like discovering the truth or healing. You know, this the empire is falling. It is. That's just a fact of life. It's been a fact of our life our whole lives. That's why we are the way we are. That's why I'm an old punk rocker doing alternative radio, because I've been witnessing the end of an empire, and so we express that in our art and in our conversations.
Yeah, that's true. I think I'm glad I come from the generation I do come from. I think I'm a little younger than you. I'm in my early 40s at the moment. Yeah. But
well, I'm 45, so I'm not that old.
Oh no,
but yeah,
yeah, fair enough. We're about the same age. I'm about 43, so fair enough. All right. Well, I think this is probably the best age to be at the moment because of what we've seen, the different epochs that we've been through, and the fact that how can I say, people in their early to mid 40s now are from the old analog world, but had they have grasped the early technology from early on and adapted to the digital world. I call us the dual booter generation. That's my name for us. Because we were before the Simon Cowell project kicked in. We saw the primordial soup of the digitisation of computers and all that coming in. We remember how the old world was as well. And so we've probably got the whole picture, or as close to the whole picture as is possible for any generation to get.
I agree. Yeah, because I remember I didn't learn computers till high school, and it was like DOS, and it was like my senior year of high school, so... But everything before that, I mean, it was, low tech, mixtapes, and, so we saw another way of being. And we hung out. That's why I call my show The Bridge, too. We hung out outside and talked, Some of us were, drinking. Some of us were experimenting with drugs, but we hung out and we at least talked to each other and we checked on each other and we didn't interface with technology all the time. There was time to relate. So it's interesting that that's what we do with technology too, is we try to get that back, what we had as kids. The riding on the back of trucks, and for me, I spent my childhood on the beach in California. So
that's lucky, I suppose. Well, might have been a bit better back then, California. Yeah.
In the 70s and 80s? Hell yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah. Well, it was. I mean, it was quite rough here in the 70s. Britain was going through a really bad time, but it caused a cultural renaissance, because when you think about punk, although the if you like, the primordial soup of punk started in New York, punk kind of like real, as a force, was pioneered here in Britain. And, it took us out of the 70s pretty much first of any country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, the real backlash against that kind of, what you say, staid, fluffy, sort of like long hair and stripy beige cardigans or whatever and flares. That was the world before that. The real backlash against all that happened here.
And I got to be part of the New York thing too, and because when I was a teenager, we moved to Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia, and so, as a teenager, I got to be part of the Philadelphia punk scene in the 80s and work at a record store called Chaos Records, and so it was a lot of fun, and I got to go to New York. New York's only 2 hours away from Philadelphia, so a lot of punk rock shows in New York, and also a place called City Gardens in Trenton, New Jersey. That was a really huge punk venue back in the 80s, and there's actually a book out about it now. Can't even count the amount of times I've seen Butthole Surfers like at City Gardens, just millions of times, and Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, and good times.
Yeah, that's true. America certainly had its fair share of that too, which was good. I mean, what do we have? I missed a lot of it, unfortunately. But you know, we had we had the Sex Pistols, the Stranglers, the Damned. The Damned are my favourite British band from that time, though, because they took a lot of influence from everywhere else, and they weren't too snobby about where they got their influences. They got old psychedelia and sort of like proto goth, and fused it into punk, and stayed pretty much a people's band. You know, they were never pretentious at any time. And you know, that was a good sign. And I was also thinking about how you just go back to the 1990s. I remember, was it Firestarter by The Prodigy got to #1 in the charts, and it was only not even 20 years ago. You could never imagine that sort of music, not even making it into the top 40 these days.
Right. It's true. Yeah, it's very homogenized, and lots of gatekeepers in the music industry. That's why I sort of right now in my life, I really lean more towards the blues that's going on now, like the newer blues and funk, and because I mean that's really where my family is from, is that sort of Gulf region area, and so there's something about that music that just sort of fills my soul, I guess. And there's a lot of labels where actually real good people can get on in that genre still. For some reason, it hasn't, because it's an older genre and people don't think they can really make money out of it. Um, it's left to some true artists, I think, in the States anyway. But also over in Europe, a lot of European labels catch some of these really good bands coming out of the Gulf region still, and promote them throughout Europe. And
Yeah, I mean, my favourite band have been around for a long time, Osric Tentacles. Recently, I saw a Finnish band called Hydria Spacefolk, who look like they're influenced by the Osrics and like Steve Hillage and Gong and all of that music. So there is a resurgence of good old school space rock with guitars, but also with synthesizers going on, and that hasn't died off. But this stuff is happening, you know, well outside the mainstream, unfortunately.
yeah,
And but at the same time, I also feel though that even though it won't kick in for a while yet, the mainstream, you know, the kind of Simon Cowell approach to music has pretty much rendered itself obsolete. Anyone with taste is not going to bother with it, and even them themselves, they're not selling the amount of sales, you know, I mean, that they had back in the 70s or the 80s. You don't get millions selling singles that have been #1 for 6 weeks anymore like you used to in the old days, and they're just a shadow of them former self. So if they have marginalised all the real music, they've also compromised themselves, because it's not worth anywhere near what it used to be.
that's true. Never thought about it like that. And iTunes is, you can get anything you want. Anything you want. Yeah,
So
good. Take them over.
yeah, that's true. I mean, I try to be optimistic on this show, you know, because I don't want to be despairing about everything. You know,
Yeah,
I look at one of the things that I do look at is the history of decentralization, and like everyone's got a computer now, and even when it comes to phones, outside iPhone, the main operating system outside iPhone is Android, which is an open source operating system. And even though corporations make the phones, they are now relying on an open source non-corporate operating system in order to work. Windows has been superseded. Their phones failed. You go back to the 80s, you had the mainframe computers, which were the domain of companies, big companies. No one could afford them. Now, that has been completely decentralized, and this is why I particularly like Bitcoin. I see that fitting perfectly in with the history of decentralization, and a lot of people think, paranoid people think that that's going to be the one world currency, but I think they may have been gazumped, by the open source brigade. I don't like to think that the elite have absolute power. I mean, they have a lot of power, but I don't think that they're beyond being outwitted or outthought.
yeah. I'm kind of like with Thomas on I like cash. I like to have something in my hand. That's just me, though. I mean, and then with the Bitcoin thing, well, it's a bit like the banking system in that, where is that money? Where is it? Where does?
Yeah.
So I think, but I really in this day and age, where we're very much aware that they want it all. So I'm really into bartering and trading, bartering, trying to grow as much of your own food as you can, that kind of thing. Because it's we just don't know what's going to happen.
No, we don't. That's
And
true.
the less we have to participate, in the system, the better off we'll be. And I'm not a hardcore person about that. I wouldn't put anyone down for whatever way they have to participate in the system. That's not really the point. The point is just finding something that works for you and your family, and starting from there. Because people get overwhelmed. Well, I don't know how to. I don't know. Just start somewhere. Stop doing something that supports it, and just go from there.
Well, you're talking about cash, and I mean, each to their own with this. But my issue with cash at the moment is because it is the dollar standard, the fiat standard, is what cash is at the behest of. It's all, we cannot control the fact that you're going to lose your purchasing power. That $10 bill will be worth $8 next year or whatever. Where with
Right.
Bitcoin,
Yeah.
Bitcoin works in the same way that the BitTorrent system works, like the Nutella network. After Napster closed, they set up this torrent-based system, which was actually invented by someone with Asperger's syndrome, and
Hmm.
they can't even begin to stop it. It's been, 15 years they can't even begin to stop it. And then someone devised a way of being able to use a torrent system to send a file that disappears at one end and reappears at another end as a financial transaction, which is set up on hundreds, thousands of different computers around the world, all completely decentralized, completely anti-fragile, completely self-correcting, beyond the control, as yet, of the banks and governments. And even if they were to make it illegal, it would become contraband, so it would go up in value. And you could always just go to another country where it's legal and just trade it for gold, and then trade the gold for cash. So I do kind of see it as a spanner in the works. But there's precious metals, and of course there's things like heirloom seeds as well. You see, I'm trying to be as pluralist as I can about all of these different ways, commodities and things that we could use to withdraw our support from the system itself. And I try to keep as much of an open mind as possible, and not just look at everything and go, oh, that's a psyop, or that's a conspiracy, because all the research I've done tells me otherwise. And I think that kind of conspiranoia can be a bit counterproductive. I'm sure you agree there with that.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I take everything with, you know, I think we should be discerning about everything. There's a lot of bullshit out in you know, the alternative. I mean, there's just a lot of it, just as much as in the mainstream, really. Um, the reason being that, you know, they want it all. So, if it sounds too good to be true, usually it is. And the same goes for, if it's really fucking implausible, if it's, you know, come on. I mean, some people really fall for some really crazy shit.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, for instance, this Kevin Annette
Oh,
organization.
I don't know about them. You have to tell me more. Yeah.
I think it's like, I don't know what the letters are, RACCTS or whatever. But anyway, there's, he's out there saying he's taking down pedophile rings, and before you know it, the Pope and the Queen are going to be, arrested.
Oh, yeah.
And people believe it. It's outrageous. I mean, there are pedophile rings out there. There are these things going on. But, you know, this Kevin and Annette person told all um, the First Nations residential school survivors in Canada, he was going to help them out and stuff. And they all hate him now because he just made money off saying that he was going to do that, and he never helped anyone. So now he's on to a new con, and people are falling for it. I mean, that's just my take. But if it sounds really fucking outrageous and like it's really not going to happen, you might want to think that that's probably, you know, what's going on. Not going to happen. And if you look at there's old YouTube videos of him at Occupy Toronto saying that he's got the bones of Indian children and he's carrying them with him. Like, what kind of person does that?
Yeah.
You know.
Oh,
So,
no, that's sick.
yeah. So why are people thinking that he's a good guy? I don't understand. It's hypnotism or something. I don't know.
It must come back down to that psychopath thing, because they seem to be very good at hypnotizing people, don't they?
Yeah, yeah. And anyone who's ever been part of a group that's sort of led by one knows when you start questioning, they're going to turn the whole group against you. That's when you know you've been operating in a psychopathic, controlled organization. So, and that happens on every level. Your personal life, and then onward and upward. Scale it up. It happens at every level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I moved about 3 years ago, and when I left London, I moved to this alternative town I live in now. I don't confirm where I live, on air, but I realised that it had a very cult-like nature. This place that I'm in, it's kind of like one of those Glastonbury places, and it occurred to me that as I was surrounded by all these hippies, I was surrounded by all these experts who were completely experts in how fucked up I was and how everything that was wrong had to do with me. And after a while I realised something. I do this kind of repeatability test on the town. I'd say, I've got my misgivings about the town. I would always get a solipsistic reaction. Maybe it's you, Niall. I'd say, no, it isn't. It's one of these, but it's definitely this town. And then they would say, oh, but it's the same wherever you go. And I'd reply saying, no, it isn't. This is one of those alternative towns. This is one of those basket case places. And then they'd sort of reply with, oh, well, fuck off then. And I'd get the same response. It would be solipsism, resignation, hostility. And I kind of realised at this point, and it galvanised it for me, that anything outside the mainstream, you go somewhere where there's a settlement of alternative people, you're straight in the bowels of think tank experimentation straight away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is how a lot of New Age organizations work as well. And cults, it's how people like James Ray can kill 3 people in, an abomination of a sweat lodge. This was years ago. He's already out of jail for killing 3 people. But he built this massively huge sweat lodge and charged people money. He did every single thing that people, that if you're taught to run a sweat lodge in a traditional way, that you wouldn't do. You don't charge money. You don't make it that damn big, and you don't use tarps. That's why people died, because they were inhaling the toxic fumes of the tarps that he used.
Oh.
He used blankets, And it was huge. It was massive. So there was no way for him to monitor everybody's well-being, which he wouldn't do anyway because he's a psychopath. So that's how, control is maintained at any level, in organizations. Is there's the, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And it's not always what they say is acceptable or not acceptable, but it's apparent through people's interaction with you. So, for instance, the whole New Age thing, I've started blocking people actually on Facebook who are like, react to my blog posts as, you can't be doing this because you're going to attract these people to you. No, actually, the opposite is true. Since I've announced myself as an expert in psychopathology, they leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm surrounded by them, but they leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, they're only going to go for easy pickings, aren't they?
Yeah, easy pickings, exactly. So, but that's the biggest New Age thing, that if you just sort of, play the game, ignore them, and don't think about the negative, just be positive.
Yeah.
Just be positive. It's really not that simple.
No.
But that's what the first thing a cult leading psychopath is going to tell you is just be positive, man, and just think it and it'll happen.
Yeah, I've always felt a kind of, aversion to people saying that because it's just a way of censoring and dismissing the whole picture. Was it Neil Kramer? Who he's been a regular since I first started. Actually, he was one of my first guests, and I've been following him for years. One of the things that he speaks about a lot is what he calls disavowal of the shadow side, and
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever heard any of his talks, but that's one thing he talks about. He says that light and shadow is like two sides of a battery, or like when you plug your speakers into your stereo, you don't think that the negative one is evil. You need both of them in order to be able to hear your music. Um, so. That one of the biggest problems there is disavowal of the shadows. The light workers are not doing any shadow work, and as a result, there's an insurmountable abyss of unresolved stuff there.
Oh, absolutely. And you see it played out all the time. You see it played out, you know, in the whole veganism debate. You see it really played out there, where you have vegans who call people who eat meat, corpse eaters, and just just really, gross and mean. And so I'm allergic to all grains, pretty much all grains. So what the hell do you want me to eat? Grass? I'll
Yeah.
just go graze off my lawn. But yeah, it's silly. We can't be doing that to each other. You
No,
know.
no, not at all. I mean, I've been a veggie for a very long time, but I'm an empiricist. I see that I've got four canines, and therefore I'm of a species that is omnivorous, and my food choice is my food choice. And unless I have four stomachs and no canines, then I'm not really in a position to judge other omnivores who choose to eat meat.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, we can't. It's a privilege to actually be able to afford the food that you would need to be able to afford as a vegan. I mean, that's a privilege. That's not something that everybody can afford to eat like, um, and maintain their health at the same time. A lot of people who can't really afford, try to be vegan and they end up really messing their health up as a result. Um, we need fat. We need it. Our brain is made out of fat. So, and that's another way. Myths about what we need and what food sources are vital. That's also part of what keeps us weak as humans. Is sort of you know we're just beginning to pick apart those myths and look at things from a um, evolutionary standpoint
Yeah, that's true.
in what we really should be eating. And no species can adapt to eating so differently as we've as we have done to ourselves. Um, yeah, so it's important to look at things. I think from an evolutionary standpoint, even with how we raise our children. Um, babies, they're born neurologically unfinished. Their heads, to be neurologically finished, their heads would have to be a lot bigger, and they would never be able to fit out the birth canal. So they're born, and for thousands of years, babies have slept with one or more parents. And and in countries where people still do that, there's no such thing as SIDS. You know, when I had my son, my back was totally destroyed, and I had to have a C-section, and so it was really hard for me to get out of bed. And my sister said to me, she goes, "I'll tell you a secret. Just keep him in the bed with you.
Yeah,
Then you don't have to get up all the time." And
yeah. Well, it's true. Or if they're going to be in a cot, have it in the same room, have it right next to you, or something.
yes, yeah, it's insane to put a child, a little baby, who's been part of you, who's grown out of your own flesh and blood, in another room all by him or herself. I mean, that's a to me that's a an element of psychopathy that's made its way into culture.
Yeah, it's a form of
'Cause common
detachment.
sense says, yeah, and then people feeding their children formula. Why would you do that? Unless and the medical necessity of that is far more rare than Americans are willing to admit. I'll put it that way. Um, so what I noticed is that when I slept with my son, we were like a symbiotic unit, and I would just wake up in the night when I knew he was hungry and just feed him, and he never woke up. He just would feed, and never had to cry, never had to put himself through that, you know, crying to get your needs met. And consequently, I find him to be a very confident child.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that part of the paedophile sort of tabloidization of paedophilia, should we say, is one of these deliberate wedges that they want to put between parents and their kids in order to...
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, I've been suspecting that for a long time.
Yeah, I'm very, very uncomfortable with how tabloidized, I would say. It's become, especially, and it's not like that as much here in America. We don't, pedophile rings are not a mainstream thing in America. The closest thing we come to it is the Catholic Church. And, the people who have been, brought to justice within that power structure, which is not the ones who are really in power, but...
Yeah. Well, I say that in England, in England, as you probably know, people are quite emotionally closed. There's a sort of a coldness about the people here, and a real sort of sexual taboo, which is not of the Catholic variety. And you can see how that has been used to socially engineer the English over time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
I absolutely can. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a real shame, I mean, to be honest, that's why I'm glad I'm 100% Irish. I'm a plastic version of Thomas, in that sense. That,
yes.
Nothing got lost in the mix, But yeah, I mean, like I say about formula as well. I mean, God, I think that's a criminally insane idea. I mean, breast milk is symbiotic to the baby. It contains the same DNA. It contains everything that you need, and all this stupid, what you call it, academics coming along. And what do academics know about anything outside their specialist field? They can't even bloody tie their own shoelaces, most of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what that does is when you give a baby formula instead of mother's milk, is it weakens their gut, and your gut is the center of your health. If your gut is messed up, you are messed up, and so it makes the person who's been on formula instead of mother's milk more susceptible to the poisons, that the multi-pronged attack, the poisoning of our. That's why there's the incidence of childhood asthma, autism, and food allergies is absolutely through the roof right now. Even children who are breastfed, but most particularly, the allergies start with the formula itself, because it's a toxic chemical mix of something that doesn't even and can't even ever come close to your mother's milk, and so you don't develop the lining in your gut, and so every child who is fed formula will have food allergies to some degree or another. There's no way to escape that.
No, it's true, and it's so much more common these days. I've noticed a lot more common than it used to be. And the funny thing about it is that most of the food allergies seem to be towards some of the most commercially viable foods that are out there as well. It's almost like as if they're trying to get you in as many ways as possible. Like, say, gluten intolerance, but yeah. The gluten intolerance seems to be specifically more to do with commercial wheat than it is to do with spelt or with other forms of wheat that are not of the more commercial variety. So it's like as if they're trying to make you more allergic and more susceptible to illness with the most commercially available food of all.
Right. It's in everything, so I've been gluten-free for 2 years, and once you become gluten-free, you really realize how much food it is in, and it just seems like, life is a pizza party. Everything is just gluten-laden, and so it is isolating to as well. So you become socially isolated because life is a pizza party, yeah. And I just realized, duh, because I'm gluten intolerant. That's probably one of the reasons why I'm so intolerant to be able to drink beer. 'Cause I would drink 1 pint of beer and just be totally drunk, you know. So I don't drink either, and that is probably a double allergy there of alcohol and gluten that caused that in me as well. So yeah, yeah,
Oh, saturated fat.
it's
Sorry to interrupt there, but saturated fat is one of the things that I remember. The marketeers all throughout my life have been telling you that you can't eat saturated fat because it's high in cholesterol. And yet, recently when I've started cooking with coconut oil is cholesterol-free saturated fat, which the marketeers tell you is impossible.
hmm yeah. There's lots of good fats out there. And I mean, it's almost to the point where they're gaslighting us with all of this information about the fats because, it keeps changing. First it's don't eat eggs, and then it's eat eggs, and then, and then with the statins on top of it, um, where doctors truly believe they're keeping their patients healthy, but they're actually handing them a pill that makes it impossible for them to absorb the healthy fats that they need as well. Um, so yeah, it's uh the whole thing is a huge, big lie. The way that our bodies are attacked, and we go to the doctor, and the doctor tells us something's wrong with us, but really there's nothing wrong with us. Your body's actually reacting normally to being poisoned,
Yeah, that's true.
and we all react differently to being poisoned. So I was being poisoned my whole life by wheat, and it crippled me by the time I was a teenager. I had arthritis. And I told them, and the doctors told me, well, that it was osteoarthritis. I'm like, well, why do I have it as a teenager? How do I have it as a teenager? And there were no answers. And my ligaments and my, um, you know, everything was just really sensitive. And I was super athletic, but I started to break down in my teens and become injured and things like that. And I really was extraordinarily athletic. So, and then the first thing they told me I had was IBS and fibromyalgia, which is a big lie. Fibromyalgia just means you're being poisoned, and this is how your body is reacting to it. You have neurological problems, and I had peripheral neuropathy, constant migraines. My stomach was upset all the time. All the things that I was diagnosed with were really obvious that I had a food allergy, but no doctor suggested that. Not one. They just gave me drugs, and so I was on Percocet and methadone and all these things just to get through the day. Um, and I finally realized it's got to be something that I'm eating because I went off the drugs. I said, I don't want to be on your drugs anymore. You're not helping me. Just fuck off.
Yeah, that's
When
what you do.
the doctor in pain management, he said, what's your goal? And I said, never to see your face ever again. And I walked out and I never went back. And as I got off the pain medicine, I realized that my stomach hurt so much and that I'd had this my whole life. So I just removed gluten from my diet and the neuropathy went away in 3 days. The neuropathy that didn't fit into any of their diagnosis, by the way. Said, how does this fit into fibromyalgia? How does this fit? Well, it doesn't. Then how does your diagnosis make sense then? How can I have, an autoimmune disease and two syndromes? Isn't their own diagnostic maxim that it's usually one thing?
Yeah.
But they don't listen to that.
No, well, actually, I did get a bit of an insight into doctors once. Well, from a lot of medical students. Before I, how to say, escaped London, I used to be a busker. I used to jump in and out of the trains on the District and Circle lines and play music at people.
Okay.
and twice a year there would be a rag week with the medical students where they used to just come and invade my carriages, and I'd say to them, "Look, can you just have some good manners and go next door, there's a busker in here," and they would go, "Oh, but we're doing this for charity," and all that, and I realised just how clueless and how much of a blatant disregard they had for how can I say, social manners at that point. And I thought, oh god, these people are going to be future doctors. I mean, most of them were really dense, and then I thought, well, and then I heard a story about some medical student who'd got scurvy, right? Because he'd spent like a lot of his grant or whatever his loan on getting drunk and malnourished, and as a result, he ended up getting an illness caused by vitamin C deficiency. And I realised that doctors are the last people you want to go to when it comes to illnesses that are caused by food. You'd better off go to a nutritionist, because doctors are absolutely bloody useless when it comes to that. They know nothing about food.
Yeah, I think the reason that we have so much in the media now that's sort of poo-pooing the gluten-free thing, and saying, like it's a big fad, and you don't need to listen to it. There's a lot of that out in the media because they're afraid of where this knowledge is going, because where it's going is looking at the bigger picture, which is that grains in and of themselves are a chemical nightmare. They're bathed in pesticides, and they have molds and other toxins in them, and they're making us sick. So it's not just that there's this special class of people that is just weird and reacts weirdly to things, because that's the narrative that's out there. People who have food allergies are weird. They need special treatment. They're not just people whose bodies are reacting normally to being poisoned. They're weird and special. So
Yeah.
we have to keep that narrative going so that we don't all realize that we need to look at what we're eating and how it affects our health.
Yeah, yeah, fair
They
enough.
want to keep us weak so we can't think and we can't fight back and not comply with their bullshit.
Yeah, it's basically was it Auschwitz without walls, basically, isn't it? Now, this is what
Yeah.
they've created. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have been looking at a lot of things, like I've incorporated whole Irish spirulina into my diet recently. I put turmeric on everything now, and
Mhm.
also, most of my bread is spelt bread or rye bread these days. I try to keep wheat to a minimum. I'm all right actually with spelt bread, because it's a medieval grain, and it goes back to before. I mean, this horrible gluten intolerance inducing wheat that we have these days. There's only one reason why it's there, and that's because it yields more and it's cheap, and it's just good for profit margins.
Right. Yeah, and it has 30% more gluten and 40% less nutrition than the wheat of our grandparents. So it's becoming harder and harder for the body to break it down, because 30% more gluten means 30% harder for the body to break down. Gluten is what's hard for all bodies to break down, and it just varies to a degree on how each of us can handle that. And that's why we all have different symptoms, and why it's hard for us to see that it's all one big thing. It's all one big multi-pronged attack against us all. We don't have to prove. The corporations are the rulers. They're the ones we have to prove are poisoning us before they stop. And they don't have to prove that they're not going to poison us by putting poison on, like Roundup. And that's what a lot of people who suffer symptoms like gluten intolerance are suffering. They're Roundup poisoned.
Yeah, and also like the academic profession are absolute masters of deconstructive reductionism when it comes to arguing with you.
Hmm.
So they can always win just by those rules, and they're not really telling you anything.
Yeah, and then if that doesn't work, they can attack your humanity
Mm.
and leave you trying to defend that. That's the psychopathic way.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there is one other thing you're on the subject of this, and that is aspartame. What I know about aspartame, since we're on the subject of food, that Donald Rumsfeld used to be a corporate lobbyist for Searle Industries, who brought aspartame to the table. Before that, you probably know this, but I'll say this for the listener. It was a banned chemical weapon on the Pentagon's list of banned chemical weapons. And now it has been, marketed since then, obsessively dieting women particularly. And I mean, it causes all sorts of problems, doesn't it? It's a neurotoxin, it affects the lining of your stomach.
Yeah.
All sorts of symptoms are caused by that.
A lot of people who have disorders like lupus, um, arthritis, um, MS, a lot of these type of disorders um, start with a poisoning like that. anybody out there who has peripheral neuropathy and they're consuming aspartame needs to stop immediately, because that is the cause.
Yeah.
Neurotoxin means migraines, you know, blood-brain barrier being passed. It's serious shit. Serious. People don't realize, and the fact that it's a chemical weapon just really shows us that it is all chemical weapons that are being, if they don't get you in your food, because the food makes you turn to pharmaceuticals for relief. So that's where the hook is. You have to turn to pharmaceuticals, and then that gets you further into the hole. And then into the big lie, which is all aimed at keeping you weak and stupid.
Well, I do get migraines. I get migraines, but I'll be honest that since I moved where I am now in the land of superfoods, my migraines have got considerably more infrequent than they used to be. And they used to be very frequent, like when I lived in London. I don't know why. I mean, I don't think my diet was really that bad then, but I incorporated a lot more, good, interesting food since I moved away. Learned a lot more about food. And now I have, 40%, maybe 30% of the migraine time that I used to have. So I've noticed an improvement there.
Yeah, I've had a huge improvement with migraines. I used to get them constantly, and really bad ones where you're vomiting and just, the incapacitating ones. And I don't get them anymore.
No, I never went to Big Pharma.
I used to have really free.
Yeah, I never went to Big Pharma about them. I would try to know myself, and I would try to, monitor the symptoms and think, right, it's crossed the line now, it's on its way down. But and also, I would induce vomiting as well, because I knew that would actually clear it quicker. But I never went to Big Pharma about any of it because because I don't trust them. I've seen what happens when Big Pharma gets its claws into people, and there's no way, there's absolutely no way. I'll put that off for as long as I possibly can, because that scares me more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the same with cancer. Just look at how chemotherapy is sold as, the way to go. And such a small success rate as well, but it's still the standard. Why? Why is that? Why?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It weakens the immune system, and as a result of weakening the immune system, that it causes, it causes the body to be able to produce less killer cells to attack the cancer tumours as a result. Well, cannabis, essential with the Rick Simpson oil, that works apparently. And Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong fame actually tried Rick Simpson's oil recently and confirmed that it had cured his prostate cancer.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only say that I know that there's a lot of success with Rick Simpson as well. I've heard, a lot of anecdotal success anyway. But I think for anyone who has the type of, cancer that's really aggressive and stuff, it's really scary for them, and fear is what's going to get you, because we don't make the best decisions when we're in that kind of fear. And it's interesting that for people with autoimmune diseases, one of the first things, they say they don't push it until it's the last option, but really one of the first things they push is biologic medications, which also suppress the immune system. And the thing about the big lie about autoimmune disease is that it is your immune system that has gone awry. Something has, gone wacky and weird. No, it's a normal reaction to being poisoned.
Yeah.
That's what happens to your immune system when you're being poisoned, is it starts attacking like proteins in your body because it wants to get rid of that thing that you're being poisoned with. So, the big lie is that your body's weird, it's reacting strangely. No, all that is bullshit. Your body is normal, it's reacting normally. So let's look at these autoimmune diseases as well as cancer from that point of view, is that that's the way that human beings have worked for thousands of years. Let's work with your body's natural way of getting rid of what's making it ill in plants and.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. Of course, they don't want to do that to us. They want us to be ill. I mean, this is quite obvious now.
That's right. Weak and dying.
Yeah.
And unable to think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us, people who are doing the thinking, we're very fortunate. I mean, I just consider how rare we are in this world. The ones of us who are actually allowing ourselves to think outside the box. I mean, it does take a lot of bravery to go through the social alienation, that all that entails as well, which is another thing, and to lose a lot of friends as well because they all think you're weird. And it amazes me that people are willing to die just to fit in.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they don't see it that way, but yeah, it amazes me too. But that's what happens is your mind is used against you when you're under the control grid. Your consciousness is used against you. That's what psychopaths do on the individual level, and then on the cultural level as well, with how heavily influenced our cultures are by the psychopaths in charge.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's such a bloody shame. I mean, I just hope that. I mean, I'm completely don't think there's going to be that awakening that we thought there was going to be in 2012. I was a bit sceptical about that too, but I mean, to be honest, if the world does get too bad, necessity is going to have to be the mother of invention, to coin a cliche there. Something's got to be done. Something must be done somewhere along the line here.
Well, we have gone all over the map, we really have. But yeah, I mean, I'm really new to the whole truther thing, and because it's not really what I come out of. I come out of more of, I'm an old punk rocker who, who's just trying to. My whole life, I've really just been trying to find out who I am, because I'm basically a Southerner who didn't grow up in the South. my parents are both from Louisiana, and so, but I didn't grow up in the South, and that's for a reason, circumstance and just the way things are, Excuse my fighting cats in the background. I've got a lot of cats, but I never see a mouse, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what we're all doing. Is just trying to find who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's I see that, like, I spent a lot of time being lost in a wilderness myself, but I've never in my whole adult life been in the mainstream, not properly anyway. I mean, I kind of pulled myself out of the mainstream, before I left school, because I knew there was nothing there for me whatsoever, and I kind of feel that, like, in a way, my heart goes out for people who pull themselves out of the mainstream at a later time in their life, because it must be much harder to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a choice. I was pretty much instantly marginalized, pretty young, just because my existence pretty much flies in the face of a lot of stereotypes, or I guess, I'm 6'1".
Yeah, all right.
Women are supposed to be small,
Yeah.
real strong, athletic. Women are not supposed to be real strong and athletic. Look white but have a Indian heritage, So
yeah. Gotta say, I'm only 5'8". I'd have to stand on a box, wouldn't I?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had no choice but to be on the margins, because my existence makes people uncomfortable, because it flies in the face of stereotypes and standards in our culture.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar thing, because, I mean, I grew up, in England during the time of the Troubles in Ireland, with a name like, Niall Murphy. And so I was on the receiving end of a lot of racist abuse. My first reaction to the English outside my parents' world was very hostile. I mean, they're a lot better with us these days, so, I don't want to knock the English or just write them off, but I hadn't grown up in that time before they had the Muslims to have a go at. It was quite difficult. So, that was one stage of alienation, if you like. And, from then on, just wanting to be different, really. Maybe it was a kind of innate feeling of cultural incompatibility where I grew up, coming from a more countercultural culture, especially. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of think that if you're American and you've got some, native blood in you, it must be the same as being English and having Irish blood in you.
Yeah, and you're not Irish enough for the Irish, and you're not English enough for the English. So,
Yeah, it's true.
I'm not native enough for the natives, and I'm not white enough for the whites.
Yeah, so they don't deal with anomalies very well, these people, it seems. Yeah.
No. So they either ignore you or are extremely fascinated by you.
Yeah.
Those are the two extremes. Yeah.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I think on top of that, I'm left-handed as well. So it's kind of had a lot of things going for me that would absolutely guarantee I would never be brought into the fold. And now I think about it, I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, my twin brother is ambidextrous, and I actually went to Catholic school. We're not Catholic, but we went to Catholic school. And the nuns, the Sisters of Mercy, used to smack him on the left hand when he would use his left hand.
Yeah, my dad had that with the old Christian Brothers. He was left-handed. He now writes with his right hand, And,
Weird.
Yeah. It goes back to language, to use the old realities made of language cliche, because that, the word left has always got negative connotations in English. It means like leftovers, left behind, that sort of thing. It's sort of like, in the political sense, it means a ragtag bunch of people who won't conform but try to conform to a second level of conformity. In Latin, it's sinister, and in, right, well, it just means correct in English. And its original name, dexter, which, translates as dexterous in English, which means that you are able to. So kind of it's sold as a form of, how can I say, devilment or crippledom, so to speak, if you're left-handed, and it's etched into the language, into the etymology so deeply over the centuries.
Yeah, but I always thought of it as the creative thing too. It was a way of suppressing the creative.
Yeah, I mean, I do see that, that they try to suppress the creative, but I think, I mean, I don't know if it's me. I would like to do more studies on left-handed people because it's a subject I'm very interested in. And the society that we're in tries to bring us into our left brains, to make us like, logical, rational Vulcans or whatever, which I think works to the disadvantage of right-handed people because it makes them stuck in one hemisphere. But I think it works to the advantage of left-handed people because it makes us more ambidextrous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we should, in some ways, strive for that on all levels. The other, when you were talking about it, one of the things I connected it to is European mystics and how Europe and the UK and Ireland has this really strong and rich history of mysticism and that sort of over-reliance on the rational and since the Enlightenment and everything, the European Enlightenment has covered over the mystical history of Europe, and that's part of the pickle that we find ourselves in today. So I studied a lot of European mystics when I was in graduate school. And the program that I was in was an alternative program, so it doesn't get me ahead in society, but I got to study a lot of really great things.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
So people like Hildegard of Bingen and Saint Teresa of Avila, people who, like Hildegard of Bingen, she was a German abbess in like the 12th century, and she's writing letters to the Pope, just excoriating his policies and things that he's doing. So a very brave woman who was, an herbalist, a musician, an artist, could pretty much do anything. And that to me is our real human potential when we look at mystics. So why does the elite, why does the establishment have to cover up this side of European history? Well, it's all part of the big lie, right? That it's the Europeans who took over the world and not the psychopaths in charge. That has something to do with the color of our skin and, all these other lies that it has nothing to do with. It has to do with pathology. all that stuff takes away from the truth. So that's why I really support people looking at their own, European heritage and finding that mystical that they're looking for when they look into, Eastern religions and Native religions and things like that. Is that, that's why people are so fascinated with those traditions, because you don't have to reach as far back, especially Native, to find the sort of mysticism in it all, the mystery, the archetypes, the strong archetypes.
Yeah, well, I say that I'm really glad that we've still got, really glad that we've still got Avebury here in England, because I've been going there for many years, and there's one place that really is in touch with the mystery, and there's a lot of people that have reconnected to that. It's very difficult for them to get rid of that. And also the fact that, even though the United Nations are part of that control grid, UNESCO have declared it a World Heritage Site, so in a way they're protecting something that keeps us in touch with the mystery as well, which is quite strange. Just one, what I say, left foot not knowing what the right foot's doing thing going on within their world. But it means that it's what I say, it means that it's really difficult for for them to completely wipe it out, because they're protecting little bits of it as well. And so, they're not going to get rid of Avebury. They're not going to be able to do the same as what they did with Stonehenge, not unless they get rid of everyone in the village, which would be very difficult for them to do, as there's a lot of posh people living in the middle of that village. This is a good thing about England. It's small, overcrowded. When it comes to the class system, and when it comes to the the different cultural diversity, they're so evenly distributed all over the country. They can't really isolate into redneck zones and this ghetto and that ghetto very easily, because the rich and the poor are all neighbours, because there just isn't a room. And so it's probably going to be harder for them to totally control this place to the level that they do with the United States. And with the United States being so sparsely populated, it's got 35 times the land of England, only 5 times the population. It's probably much easier for them to herd you lot than it is us.
Yeah, but then there's also, lots of sites of resistance. The only thing we really have to put up with in these sites of resistance is the lack of infrastructure. And so that's how they, if that's how Agenda 21 plays out in the U.S., is that they refuse to build the infrastructure in the rural areas, so that people go to the cities to have infrastructure and affordable housing and things like that. And so that then they have a more controllable population. They only want rich people living in the country.
Yeah.
That's all they want.
Yeah, that's true. And, and it seems like it's going to be much easier to deal with that problem, than, to deal with that in America than it would be over here. But, at the same time, one of the problems that they've got to deal with is the fact that a lot of the rich people who live in places like Avebury are bourgeois bohemians, which kind of makes them a little bit too much like hippies, and they're a little bit too close to the establishment as well, so they are a little bit scuppered there. But I don't know what their long-term plans are. I don't know what they're going to do eventually, but one thing for sure is that I don't know how Agenda 21 is going to set off. I hope it doesn't have 100% success rate, and we can only hope that. I am a little bit pessimistic because I don't know how we're going to be able to stop it. I mean, I must admit, maybe I've been listening to Alan Watt too often recently, but
Yeah, again, it's like, I just think that we need to keep it simple and back out from the system in whatever ways is possible for you and your family, and make those decisions together, and not get on each other for, well, you're part of the system because you do this, because we really need to understand with each other. It's all about limiting our choices.
Yeah.
And so if we judge each other for the way that we deal with our limited choices, we're never going to get anywhere, and we're just playing into the divide and conquer in a different way. So, that's why I really, I have a great friendship with Carrie Lee from Lifting the Veil, and Justin, because they're living their protest, and they're making professional product to show people examples of how to live your protest and be your own site of resistance. Because that's the only way to go. I mean, you can't, anytime you get out there and try to, you know, change the world, they're, that's where that's the first place you're going to run into the psychopaths in charge, right? It's a big organization to change the world, because that's what they want to do. They want to alter you, and they want to alter reality, and they want to change the world so that it's even more of a prison planet that
Yeah.
they're in charge of.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I've been talking a lot about decollectivization recently, because if we're a bunch of a bunch of naughty children, ne'er do wells, but we don't form an organisation. We just how can I say, me, you, Thomas, Danielle Laverite, Lou Collins, a lot of the people who are in this, we're just a bunch of individuals. We're not affiliated to any group. We haven't got a mandate. We haven't got a party line that we toe. We're just a bunch of unruly anarchists. And, well, yeah, that is our strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, and Kira, I might have to put a lid on it now, but cheers for popping on the show.
Thank you, Niall.